Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Koinonia hour. It's been such a long time since I've had a Koinonia hour, but um, I'm happy to be here today, most especially with Mena Lee Jones. I know you're a super busy person, and I know you're always, hey, look, you're always working. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Awesome, Joni. You know, it's always fun when we get together. So I'm always appreciative of when we actually have time in both of our busy schedules to be able to come together and talk about the things that God wants us to speak on in this season.
And it definitely is a season that we're in. And our purpose today, that we were just in prayer, and our purpose today and what we're about to talk about, I want to preface. We're going to talk about, obviously, things that have recently been happening in the world, and there's a lot of entertainment drama about it, but we're not about that. We're about directing your attention to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And but I'm just going to get going and start talking about it because I don't want to waste a second of time. So I'm just going to jump in. When the Queen passed away, um, it was like the next day, and I had just been sitting there watching it, and I remember, you're watching it, I'm sure, and listening about it. And then I started to hear like things like, oh, she reigned. She's the only monarch who has reigned in 315 years. She's the first one that has reigned. But that's one source I read. I've heard people saying in history, the only monarch that reigned for a total of 70 years. Being a person that's in prophecy, a watchman, um, I said, well, 70 is a significant number. So time marches on. And then it says, well, Charles will now ascend to the throne. And I thought to myself, how old is he? So I typed it in. It was 73. And then I saw the same day that I thought, oh, yeah, because I wanted to see what age he was. And it said he was born November 14th, 1948. And I said, hold on a minute. Whenever we see the 1948, right, we're like, okay, May 14th, 1948, Israel becomes an independent nation. On the same day, or the day after, I saw an article, which, by the way, I've been seeing many articles, so it is true, that the Queen, months before her death, was getting together with groups, her people, and she was writing out instructions that were irreversible and became an edict, that she wanted things ran a certain way. So she had it written, and it's irreversible, that Prince Charles will only reign for 7 years. So, of course, Mena, I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting because
Mhm.
I'm thinking about Israel. And listen, sometimes, Mena, we'll see things, but we're like, I'm just going to be what's that, conservative on things. Let's just
Mhm.
see things play out. Because in the past, when in my youth, I'd be like, look at what this means, look at what that means, but not anymore. You do mature in those kind of things, and you're like, well, let's just see what that means. Um, that's when I called you. And I told you all these things. I was like, Mena, I'm not trying to make anything out of it. I'm not trying to say I know anything, or or I'm not trying to make anything fit, but look at this end of time. We know we're at the end. We biblically, prophetically know by the Jewish calendar, not the Gregorian calendar, that we are at the end. Listen, it is, most people are hopping on board, and they're knowing that it's true. Okay. So my mind starts thinking, well, wait a minute. I'm just thinking. So the Queen dies. He has now 7 years from that day. I don't know. We do know about Daniel's 70th week. kind of things to look at. So after I had said all these things to you, I said, I'm just going to leave all of this with you. I'm going to go do my own research and let's see what you come up with. So you came up with some really fascinating, important information. So I know there's some things I want to hear from it, what you gathered, because I haven't heard yet. So go ahead.
Yeah, so like you were just saying, we talked or what have you. Um, I ended up, in fact, I believe it started the day before. The day before the Queen died, we actually spoke. And because you had sent me that article from Israel 365 regarding the train stop in Jerusalem and about them building announcing that they're going to start this line and during Passover of 2023, and that the plan was to build this train stop that starts at the international airport in Tel Aviv, straight to the Western Wall. Of course, there's a train line that goes already to the Old City, which is Jerusalem, but a specific stop being added to the Western Wall, and that article, of course, indicated that the real implication was because it was to bring the people, and it specifically said 70 nations, from the international airport in Tel Aviv straight to the Western Wall for the purpose of the third temple, which they wanted to call the Jerusalem House of Prayer. So that it started that. So that day was already significant for me because I was looking at that article that you had sent me. I was out and about. I ended up going to a salon and happened to be at the right place at the right time where television was at, because I don't have TV, I don't have television at home. I don't have like satellite or cable or anything. And on purpose, okay, just had to name that I choose not to have that. But there was breaking news that day because it was the day of the unveiling of the White House portraits for the Obamas, who had not been in the White House since 2017. So then on top of that, and I ended up doing a podcast that day, which was the day before the Queen died. So it's so funny because I'm like, how stuff just kind of happens and it starts what they call catapulting, and it seems like it started with that. The article, then the announcement, then the portraits, and the next day the Queen dies. It's like, all of this stuff is kind of happening at once because I had to also count in the unveiling of the portraits, because if we want to talk about numbers, and some people, let's just start by saying this. The fact is that we know that Christians get obsessed with every little. Christians sometimes can walk around with just like spectacles on and microscopes, not even binoculars. They're looking for every little sign, every little prophecy. Of course, we know today that Christians, evangelicals specifically, are like, I call them prophecy junkies. They're obsessed with everything. But I always have to remind myself of two things to keep a balance. Yes, Jesus said, keep watch, but people keep watch for the signs. He gave us the signs in Matthew chapter 24, Luke chapter 21, Mark 13. But also, too, remembering that he said that a wicked and a perverse generation is always seeking after a sign. The 21st century, we are definitely a wicked and perverse generation. If you want to talk about perversion and wickedness, it definitely abounds, unfortunately, not just in the world, but also in the church. And that says, so like yourself, like you said yourself, you're just kind of like, we hear all this stuff and you see everybody diving in. And I'm one of those people. I'm the person that sits on the hill, and watches and let all the debris settle first, because it's sensationalism. A lot of it is sensationalism. So I wanted to see, and there was just all these arguments, Joni, on social media. And the arguments were just the wildest things, about, did she go to heaven? Was she human? Was she transhuman? The wildest stuff, serpents and King Charles or Prince Charles and Prince William and Antichrist. And I'm like, oh, these people are crazy. Like, that's all I kept thinking to myself. So if we're not careful, if we don't use wisdom, and if we're not being still and listen to the still small voice of God. We can get caught up in sensationalism. However, I knew, just like yourself, that what had happened just in those 2 days was significant. Okay, so I steer away from, you know, Queen Elizabeth's personal life and her religious life and whether she's in heaven or hell. Like, that's, I'm not saying that I don't care about someone's soul, but I'm not interested in that because she's gone. Wherever she is, she is. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I'm not interested in that. But I do know for a fact that her reign was significant, as we talked about. So there's these numbers that are involved. So you mentioned the numbers of Queen Elizabeth, but the day before, we're looking at this train station where it's located, 70 nations, the house of, or Jerusalem House of Prayer is what they want to call the third temple. Then there's the unveiling of the Obamas. It's from, they haven't stepped in the White House since 2017, but interestingly, the whole entire ceremony, if you want to call it that, or meeting, it wasn't even about what was currently happened. They went back 14 years and they kept saying 14 years ago, 14 years ago, 14 years ago. And I'm just like, wait, then we got 14, we got 2017, we got, and then the next day, the queen dies after 70 years. So I'm just like, so my mind is starting to go, I'm like, okay, there's something happening. People don't realize is that God is a great mathematician. And in rabbis in Judaism, in teaching, Jewish scholars and rabbinical studies, they are deep into numbers. I mean, if we look at the Hebrew language as it is, we know that it has a numerical value behind each and every number. There are patterns even in the Torah, and when you look at it from the Hebrew perspective. And so I study these things, being, you know, of course, you yourself, you've got a Jewish background, even though we say we're just Christians, we're followers of Christ. We don't go into that. But the fact of the matter is, historically, or let's just say bloodline, you know, both of your parents are Jewish. Only one of mine is maternal on my mother's side. My grandfather was a grandson of a freed slave, but my grandmother was Jewish, tribe of Levi. Actually, we know what our tribe is on top of that. So there's just certain things you can't dismiss in that sense, and looking into that. So I started to dig when you first sent me that article. That's when I started digging. Well, I did this podcast, and then the next day the queen died, and I thought, oh shucks, I should have waited. If I just waited one more day or what have you. But it's fine, because when we talked again, I was like, Joni, let's just do this. Let's just do this. So my brain is going to go like all over the place. First of all, we talked about the queen. She reigned 70 years. The first thing that comes to my mind about 70 is the generation. I mentioned in Psalm 90, of course. The generation, as David wrote, I think David wrote it. It wasn't Asaph. I think it was David that wrote about 70 years is the average, you know, for some who live good, than 80. So we know that a generation is between 70 and 80 years on average. That's considered a generation. It's not. Interestingly, if we look at the Western society today, the average lifespan is between 70 and 80. That is the average lifespan of most people on planet Earth now. As far, that's considered living a good life, even though we know in Genesis, the Lord spoke and said he would shorten man's life to 120 years. There are some rural areas in the Orient or what have you, in certain places in the mountains of South America, where you can find people that get into their hundreds. And it's a natural thing. And I'm sure it's because of how they ate or what have you. Even when we look at the history of the Essenes, their average lifespan was like 110 years, you know, or as far as that. But it's a very small scale. For the average today, we typically live between 70 and 80 years. You know, that's our average. So that's marked as a generation according to Psalm, what is it? Psalm 90:10, I believe. Okay. So, and so she reigns for 70 years, which we talked about, but she dies on a Shmita cycle, because we are ending a Shmita cycle, during Rosh Hashanah, or I like to use the original word Yom Teruah, which is the blowing of the shofar, at the end of September, basically the end of this month, in 2 weeks, basically, is basically where we're heading into Tabernacles. We're heading into High Holy Days just in a matter of a few days from now, which ends a Shmita year because it started in September of last year. So from September of what we know as the Gregorian calendar 2021 into September of 2022 is a Shmita cycle. We are also, as we talked about, in the 49th year of going into Jubilee. So I actually thought we were in the 50th year. The 50th year actually starts next year, or according to Israel's calendar, it starts in a few weeks or a couple of days or what have you, because the civil calendar, I believe, is what it's called. They go from September to September, basically from tabernacles to tabernacles, or Teshri to Teshri. But we know biblical or Hebrew calendar is Nisan to Nisan, which is, spring to spring. So they have their religious calendar, they have their civil calendar, what have you. But according to the civil calendar in Israel, we're going into a full 50th Jubilee year of marking of 5783, which according to them starts in a few days.
I want to throw something in because I think it's important, even though it just is a worldly thing. I just thought it was totally interesting that on June 2nd of this year, remember when they threw her a huge 70th year Jubilee?
A Jubilee, yes. I thought that was really, really interesting that they called it a Jubilee celebration, because so they were referencing it Jubilee, not according to Hebrew numerology, if you want to call it that, and I'm gonna try to be careful with my words because there's always the spectators out there. But actually, what they consider Jubilee of it being 70, the fact that she had reigned for 70 years, they consider that a Jubilee. And we know that Jubilee in Hebrew, it represents a victory, a setting free, a release, of things or what have you. She had made or marked, she made a marking or a milestone. She reached a milestone. Like you said, we don't know. We've heard that she's the longest reigning monarch ever. Some people say she's just the longest reigning queen as it is, but we know that you said 350 years. Some people saying she's the longest standing queen, period, or what have you. There was a milestone there, and they celebrated it back in June or what have you. So a lot of things. So we've got the 70, we've got Psalm 90:10 that says, the generation 70 years. We have the fact that we're ending the Shemitah cycle, and she leaves this earth before the Shemitah cycle ends, which is very interesting as well. And then we're going into a Jubilee cycle, or not cycle, but an official 50th year of Jubilee as well. Now, she of course didn't make that, but she stayed within that 49-year reign. Actually, she reigned within the Jubilee year, which is really interesting because she reigned within a Jubilee cycle on top of that. So we could count that too if we really wanted to as well. So then there's, again, these are all these numbers. Okay, so I'm throwing out a lot of numbers and, of course, interject at any point. But then you mention this situation with King Charles, or who's Prince Charles that's now finally King Charles. So yes, I did some research. So I have friends in Europe, as you know. I went into England and into Scotland in 2019. I went there to minister. And I have friends there. I have several friends there. I have friends in Scotland. I have friends in Manchester. I have friends in London. And there's some of them are ministers, and others are just, brothers and sisters in Christ or what have you. And so I stay in touch with them on a regular basis. They're like I love these people. They're my friends. I could actually call them friends. They are my friends and not just acquaintances, or what have you. And so I had ended up talking to my friend in London regarding all of this, because of course, the Queen dying, it's a big thing. She lives in London. I mean, she's in Britain. And so this is where we began talking about this whole thing about the Queen basically altering or setting up some rules before she perished, or she knew she was dying, basically. So she wanted to make sure certain things were set up. And I did some research on, I know you had sent me some information. I had to do some deep research myself in regards to it, mentioned it to my friend in London who also did some research. And so interestingly, apparently it's true that she limited King Charles term to 7 years, which is really interesting because it's not, even though it's public, it's not public. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, it's public information, yet it's not an official royal declaration. Like, they didn't publicly announce it. And so that's really interesting. We're like, okay, well, what's that? And then he's to turn it over to Prince William, and that's the next person in line. And so that, you know, so we got 7 years. Then we look at, so there's another 7. Then we look at the fact that Charles was born. This is where it gets really interesting, because so Charles is born on November 14th of 1948. He's born exactly 6 months to the day after Israel is declared a nation. So you're like, So that makes him currently 73 years old, because it's been 73 years since Israel was declared a nation. Then you start talking about the fact that the Queen gave him 7 years to rule only, for whatever reason. There's a lot of speculation as to why. Some people say it's because of what happened with Princess Diana and Camilla. She's like she's upset. Some people feel like he's too radical. They say because he's too radical and she doesn't really trust him long-term rulership. There's a lot of different speculations as to why she shortened it to 7 years, but we don't know officially. But you add 7 years to his current life, and that puts him at 80. Now we're back to Psalm 90:10 again. Between 70 and 80 years, this generation. So here's the thing. So like, oh, well, what does all this mean? Okay, and I'm going to throw some more numbers out there in a second, but what does it mean? You know, I mean, I don't believe it's a coincidence. And here's why. Because going back to what I said, numbers are important. You know, the Bible talks about in Psalms, right? It tells about he places kings and he takes them down. We can throw queens in there too, right? So kings, queens, we had Queen Esther, right? But we know that here we are in the lower end of the stance. Okay, I'm gonna call it like the chicken stance, because I talk about how God wants us to soar with eagles, and too many Christians want to cluck with chickens. Chickens don't fly. They don't technically fly. They're just, you know, they're gathering together and they're clucking hens. You know, they're talking to each other and, you know, and Christians are like clucking chickens a lot, in the sense that, you know, we're down on the lower bases and we're trying to discuss again weird stuff like, you know, well, who's saved and who's a serpent and who's a lizard and who's a human and who's a this and who's got an implant, and it's like, can we look at the bigger picture here? God owns everything. He's sovereign. That's a word that me and you like to toss back and forth in conversation. We know that God is sovereign. Sovereign means he owns everything. Okay. Isaiah 45, one of my favorite scriptures, he says, he created the light and the darkness, and he is the one who commands. And I like to use the Hebrew instead of the English, the shalom and the ra. And because it's in English or in the King James, it says, the peace and the chaos, but shalom we know is so much more than peace. It's totality, and we know that Ra is the complete opposite of shalom. It is darkness, it's chaos, it's confusion, it's sickness, it's all of these things. But he said he owns it, he commands it. Which means also too what he owns Satan. He owns Ha-Satan as well. So when we can rise above the clucking chickens and all the little petty arguments in the hen house, we have to look at the fact that God owns all of this. And so he knows who's going to rise and who's going to fall. He sets it up. He sets it up. I'll have to throw in there he knew that Trump was only going to win one term. To people who are out there saying, oh, it's the people's fault, and it was nobody's fault. Listen, it was already written. This is how God had it set up. God didn't go and take a bathroom break, and while he was on a bathroom break, stuff happens, and he's like, oh, oops. There's no oops with God. He sees everything and he knows everything. So because of that, we know that there's divine order, and there is divine order. And so kings, queens, monarchs, presidents, prime ministers, we'll talk about that too in a second. He allows them to be placed. It was already written in the books of time, if you want to call it that these people would be put into certain positions for certain lengths of time, and certain people will have very significant roles, okay? Because we're all, like they talk about in psychology, only thing that separates us is 6 degrees, or 6 degrees of separation. But the truth be told, it means that everybody is connected in some way, some form and fashion. And that's what one of the things the Lord had given this woman, and a really powerful testimony about this woman who tried to commit suicide. And that's another testimony. She had a visitation with Jesus, but he told her that he said, we don't realize that everything we do affects everything and everyone around us. It's a ripple effect.
A cause and effect.
Yes, everything, it's a ripple. So there's no one person, no one life that has existed on planet Earth that didn't have a divine purpose, a divine time, a divine setting. Like Ecclesiastes tell us, there's a time and a season for everything. Well, there's a time and a season for every person as well. And everybody has a season. And even the people that come into our life, it's for a season. Whether that season is long-term, like we just seen this incredible reign of Queen Elizabeth, and I say incredible because it was a 70-year reign, or whether it's someone a child that the Lord decides to take home only after 6 months. It still doesn't mean that a 70-year reign versus a 6-month life is any insignificant. It's all combined into the great picture, the great puzzle that God created this world and this earth and these people and creation, all of this from a beginning and to an end. And so it all works out. So because of that, that's why I like to look at, the numbers and the patterns and the setting of all of this and say, okay, there's a significance. I want to take those numbers and move into something else, but I want to make sure that you didn't want to add anything.
No, go ahead.
So taking all of those numbers, I want to go into what triggered my thought after we got off that phone. It reminded me of a video that I did. And I did this video back in, I believe, 2014. So that's 8 years ago now. And I titled it The 10th Jubilee. And this was in I opened up a YouTube page in 2013. It was, I think, 5-6 years into ministry. I still consider that very early, considering I'm going into 16 years now. And so I did this kind of what I consider now to be an amateur video about the prophecies of Rabbi who, interestingly, the Jewish or Judaism community, they don't really acknowledge him. In fact, they consider his writings only footnotes. But this man name was Rabbi Judah ben Samuel. He was also known as Yehuda HaHasid, or Judah the pious one. And so he was a part of an Ashkenazi German, group back in the 1100s. And he was born roughly somewhere around 1150 AD, but he died in February of 1217. And the thing about Yehuda is that, Rabbi Yehuda, he had a lot of writings and literatures that are Kabbalistic or Kabbalah or what have you, their Jewish mysticism or what have you. So before you write me off on that, again, some people you have to understand it. Well, no, I'm not even going to go there. Some people you just have to understand that you have to find different things in different things. But he's known for a prophecy. And interestingly, this man gives this prophecy the year that he dies. Now, he dies in February of 1217. And so obviously, it was a very short time before he passed away, because he had these prophecies in 2017. It doesn't say if it was February, it doesn't say if it was January, but I want to read what he wrote. He predicted what is called the 10 Jubilees. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that. Are you familiar with him? Okay, so I'm going to tell you.
No, I have heard of him before. I've read a couple of things from him because of research, but that's it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So before he dies, this is what he predicts. Word for word, this is what he wrote. He said, when the Ottoman Turks conquered Jerusalem, they will rule over Jerusalem for 8 Jubilees. Afterwards, Jerusalem will become a no man's land for 1 Jubilee. And then in the 9th Jubilee, it will once again come back to the possession of the Jewish nation, which would signify the beginning of the end of the messianic end times. Okay, so those were his words. That was the prophecy. Now, there's a lot of different things about Judah ben Samuel. Some people say that he claimed to have had conversations with the prophet Elijah. There's a lot of legend about him. Some people say that he had miracles. There were things that he did that were classified as miracles or what have you. And but I found it interesting that of all his writings, and he came from a very interesting family line, a family line called Koinonia. And it's really interesting because Koinonia is Greek, and they're actually a group of Jewish families that were in Germany, but they actually originally came from Italy and Greece and migrated to Germany between the 9th and the 13th century. And they also, so some of the things about their family is that they led they led groups of Jews all the way during the Crusades. We mentioned the Crusades earlier. And the massacres of the Crusades. So if people don't know about the Crusades or only heard of it, the Crusades, of course, was the group of people who their whole obsession was Jerusalem. They claimed that they were looking for the Holy Grail, which we know was the supposed to be the
Knights Templars.
Oh, it's the Knights Templars that was the Holy Grail? Okay, sorry. So Crusades was just obsessed with Jerusalem. Thank you for correcting me. And so the Crusades were just obsessed with Jerusalem in that sense. But whether it's the Knights Templar and the Crusades, there's two things that are very in common, and that is they were really, really honestly, truly linked to okay, well, let me just say this. Crusades, I think, or as a Knights Templar, I think they found that they were worshiping Baphomet. They found like caves and stuff where they were doing child sacrifices and all that kind of stuff. But the other ones were linked to the Catholic Church. A lot of people don't realize, and I know it's probably going to shoot out for this, but that a lot of the anti-Semitism started with the Catholic Church. Because, and that's why all of the holidays and stuff got wiped out and their names got changed and the calendars got changed, because the whole rumor was that the Jews killed Jesus. And so,
well, and let me just inject this for a second. What about the diaspora? And this is an important injection because I'm going to throw in some history. Anybody can look it up. It's secular history. It's biblical, religious history. In 1492, there was I understand that there was I was reading from a very excellent biblical historian, and he talked about the Jewish fifth column, and that Jewish fifth column is, well, let me just set that aside, but let me go back to the 1492 diaspora, because during that time, the throne of Isabel and Ferdinand, they were broke. Okay. Now, there were some prominent Jews, and one particular prominent Jew who was bankrolling their wars and really bankrolling their thrones. There was a man named Tomas de Torquemada. He was a Dominican priest. He was like the priest of the Catholic Church. And, of course, he plays on the superstition
Mhm.
of Isabel because she was very, very superstitious,
Superstitious. Yep.
whereas Ferdinand, a little bit of superstition, of course, but he said he came in and he told them, he said, listen, the Jews in your land, um, they're taking it over, and you guys don't forget. I mean, of course, I'm modernizing because he didn't say you guys, but he said to them, uh, he said to both of them, you both know that they represent the Christ killers. And according to this historian, according to his work that he was studying, I'm sure he went into, because he said that when he was saying that, Torquemada was saying that the king really didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he was happy with the bank rolling and them supporting everything. Torquemada, knowing this, he left and come back because he realized nothing was going to be done about it. And he played on her and he said, if you do not rid the people out of this land, you are going to be responsible for the blood of Christ on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, an edict was made that all Jews either become conversos
That's
or
right.
Marranos.
That's
And
right.
so that's right. And so so the conversos were your people who have lived there multi-generationally, the
Mm-hmm.
Jews that came up after the 70 AD Titus,
Mm-hmm.
Vespasian. They marched those Jews, the southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, they march them into Spain. So
Yep.
there's some history there,
Yep.
great history.
Yeah,
So
that was what the 1492 was. What you just described was called the Spanish Inquisition. So that's what it
exactly,
was. Yep.
right.
Mhm.
But there was an edict that they had to leave. They had
That's
to
right.
leave.
It was
And
either convert or go. And so some people say that that some of the Jews actually went to who we know today as Christopher Columbus as well, that they also had gone to him. Now that's another story. Some people say that Jewish people were on the Mayflower and other ships or what have you that came into this country. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that at all, because I know one of the things I found going into Latin America, we got the Sephardic Jews and all of that down in Central and South America. I lived in Central America for a year, and I lived in specifically in the country of Panama. And in Panama City, there is a whole entire large group of Jews. When you go into downtown Panama, there's this big erected like steel menorah on top of a building. There's kosher delis and all of that stuff. You go into the Dominican Republic, during World War II, was 100,000 Jews that escaped during World War II, and they settled in the island of the Dominican Republic. There's actually an old synagogue that is set as a relic now in the Dominican Republic outside of Santo Domingo. And so we know that they got dispersed to the four corners of the earth, which, that was prophecy.
yeah, that was prophecy. But also, too, the Marranos, they were your regular people that go, look, we can't, because all the surrounding nations, they weren't welcome there. So
That's
they
right.
didn't want to become border people. So they go, here's what we're going to do. We're going to feign conversion. We're going to be baptized. We'll change our Jewish
Yeah.
names to Christian
Yeah.
names. And we'll
Yeah.
continue our jobs, our businesses, our children, because there's nowhere to go. But we will secretly keep our feasts and our holy days. But the Marranos were a group of zealous Jewish men who also feigned conversion, but that was in order to infiltrate the Catholic Church to bring it down from the top, which didn't work. They actually began to like the power and I may not be popular for that, but hey, look, this is
it's the truth,
this
though.
is secular history.
This is
I'm
me,
talking,
yeah, and that's what me and you do. We look for truth. That's what people. I'm not into conspiracy. I'm in the facts. I'm in the facts. I'm in the
listen.
prophecy. Yeah.
Look, and when I do research, I'm not just
Mhm.
looking at biblical research.
Mhm.
I want to see what secular historians say
That's
and match it
correct.
up. But
Yep.
one last thing, Ignatius Loyola, his last name was Cohen.
Wow, I
Okay.
didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, our family, my dad's side, just
Mhm.
as a throw out there for like 2 seconds,
Mhm.
it's all it deserves. They're from Spain. They're from Toledo, Spain. Um,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. And on my end, our family, my mother's end there, and I have to say this because you see my skin color. So then people hear that I'm Jewish and they automatically think that I've converted to like the Black Hebrew Israelites. But no,
No.
my
No, that's not right.
my
No, it's
Jewish
not true.
lineage is actually European as well. It's European. It's not, like I said, my grandfather or my great grandfather. I say grandfather, but it's actually my great grandfather, which is my mother's grandfather. I had to think about that. Was a grandson of a freed slave, and so there was just this mixture of stuff in the Midwest. Or I have pictures. I have like black and white pictures of. They drove a taxi cab, and it was like a lot of interesting stories that I was told about my family about how they had to hide out as an interracial couple, and they, it was just all of these different things that were going on.
Wow.
However, the Jews were at one point discriminated against anyway, so they kind of like fit in with the Black people. And during the segregation or what have you, the Jews, the Irish were another group of folks that were hated,
And listen, what's so funny? I know we're on a little rabbit trail, but
yeah.
I live in California. The Dodgers are up in LA, and there's this place called Chavez Ravine. Okay. And my family's been here since 1923 and in California, and Hispanic. So one day I was like, I don't know, I just want to do some research on the Chavez Ravine, which is where the Dodger Stadium is. I'm like, what's up with the Chavez Ravine? I did some history. Do you know it's exactly what the Jews were with the Black people? Like, hey, we're going to hang with you guys. They don't like you. They don't like us. So we'll just be together.
We're going to just mesh together.
That was an actual, because
that's an
everybody's like,
actual
oh, well,
truth.
that was like some little illegal little village that the Mexicans built out there. And they had their own little cantinas and their mercados, and they had all that. But what they did not add was there was a thick, rich Jewish community that lived
in the midst of that. Exactly. Yeah, and that's how in Chicago was the same thing. In fact, it was something that ran in our family. On my mother's side of the family, it was like, well, the story was, if you get in trouble, my great grandmother would say, go to the Jew, they'll help you. And you're like, oh, why? But that was the thing, and so Chicago had a very big Jewish community. In fact, unfortunately, there was a slang term for another area in Chicago. It was actually called Jewtown, which was around when I was a kid. And I think they closed it down in the 90s or what have you. But it was an area where there was a lot of shops and so on and so forth. And I grew up in the Hyde Park, University of Chicago area, which had a lot of Jewish and a lot of Italian people. And that's where I grew up on the south side near the lake, on the lakefront. So anyways, that's a little bit of my history, or both of our history, or what have you, in that sense. So going back, I do want to add one thing. You were mentioning about what was going on in Spain that led to the Spanish Inquisition of 1492, as we were talking about. So interestingly, you talk about the converts, what have you. So this is why the Jewish people don't really pay attention to the writings of Judas ben Samuel, because he was Ashkenazi. So interestingly, the Ashkenazis were also like that. They were the ones who kind of converted and then incorporated Christianity into their traditions and their teachings. And so because of that, again, what he represented is not a main reference in Judaism, because they were known as the people that kind of blended Christianity into their Jew. And I've actually heard people say that Ashkenazi Jews are not real Jews or what have you. And they say, and people have said it for lots of like racist things or what have you. But the truth be told, to some of the other Jewish sects, it has to do with the fact that this particular group and this particular family, again, and their family lineages, they kind of were into mysticism, and they had incorporated a lot of like Christian, incorporation, tainting, if you want to call it that. And so they were overlooked in that sense. But this man, again, predicted what was called the 10 Jubilees that interestingly came to pass. So I want to go down that timeline because, again, I'm going to tie this in to why I feel like this is all really significant about what has happened in the last 2 weeks as far as, monarchs and all of this stuff is going on. So, again, he talked about 10 Jubilees. The first part was that he said, and I just got my note here, so if I'm looking down, it's because of that. When the Ottoman Turks conquered Jerusalem, they will rule over Jerusalem for 8 Jubilees. So we know that the Ottoman Turks, which is now in modern day Turkey, after Rome and all of that got depleted, because Rome owned a big part of Europe. They went as far west as Britannia, which is currently Britain, but they conquered all of northern Africa, all the way like Libya and all of that area, Egypt, all of that, and of course what we consider the Middle East, which was Israel at that time, Judea, Palestine later on is what they called it. But then the Ottoman Turks also was an incredible empire that ruled, and they also ruled northern Africa, but they also went into what was now called Spain and Portugal, which actually at that time was called Cordova, before it was called Spain and Portugal. And so they had a really big empire, but they also too conquered Jerusalem specifically because, of course, after Rome laid it to waste, of course, we're talking about Titus, and of course the book of Josephus mentions all of that stuff. It laid away a desolate land. Jerusalem always had its few occupiers. Jerusalem was never uninhabited. That's the interesting part about this. Jerusalem was never uninhabited. And a lot of people don't know that Jerusalem first was habited by the Jebusites, The Jebusites is where Jerusalem originated from before it was conquered by the Jews in that sense. But so even when it was laid as a wasteland after it was burned down, there was always a group of true bloodline Jews that inhabited Jerusalem, even through the Crusades or what have you. But the land itself was called Palestine. And then that's why the whole argument, is like, oh, the Palestinians, we know that's not true. But they changed it to Palestine because it was formerly called Judea. That entire land, as we know, has gone through multiple name changes.
Capitally.
Yes, because in the Old Testament, Judah was to the south and Israel was to the north, and then you had Samaria, and then all of that. It's been all of these geographical changes with Jerusalem being continuous in that sense. So of course we know the land was eventually called Palestine. So the Ottoman Turks took control of Jerusalem in the year 1517. So it's really interesting because this man dies in 1217. He gives this prophecy in 1217. He dies in 1217. And so 300 years later, in 1517, the Ottoman Turks, and it's so interesting how precise it is. We got even numbers, okay? In 1517, the Ottoman Turks take control of Jerusalem. And now his prediction was that they would have it for 8 Jubilees, which is 400 years, because Jubilees are 50 years, okay? So precisely to the date, the Ottomans lose control of Jerusalem exactly 400 years later, or 8 Jubilees later, in 1917. And guess who they lose it to? The British Empire.
That's right.
They lose it to the British Empire. Now, he also predicted that once they lose Jerusalem after 8 Jubilees, that Jerusalem would be a no man's land for 1 Jubilee, which is 50 years. Now, he wasn't talking about Palestine, Judea, Israel. He was specifically talking about Jerusalem, the holy city. So we know that Israel became a nation in 1948. We're fully aware of that, right? But it did not recapture Jerusalem until after the 6-Day War in 1967. Thus, from 1917 to 1967 is 50 years, or one Jubilee, just as he predicted. Okay, so he says that he predicts that no man's land will be for one Jubilee. Then he says after that, once the 9th Jubilee comes, that would come, and then after that, for the 10th Jubilee, that the beginning, and I think this is a really interesting wording. He said the beginning of the messianic end times begins. So the 10th Jubilee became 50 years after 1967, which is when Israel reclaimed Jerusalem. Well, 50 years from there was 2017. Okay, so that marked it as the 10th Jubilee. Okay, so he declares or prophesies that when the 10th Jubilee came, which marked it for 2017, that would begin the time of the messianic end times. And it's just so interesting because some people have said, well, he prophesied that the Messiah would come. Now we know that the Jews, whether they're Hasidic, Sephardic, Orthodox, what have you, ultra Orthodox, there's all these different ones, right? The conservative, the liberal, all of this stuff. They don't believe that Yeshua is Mashiach. Okay, we know that, unless they're messianic. Okay, and then that's a whole nother, they're really converted at that point, unless they're messianic. So we know that the Mashiach that they're looking for actually plays parallel to what Daniel chapter 9 references in Revelation chapter 13 references as the beast, because we know that the wrath or the great tribulation, as everybody gets divides it up into different names, or what we call in the Old Testament Jacob's trouble, is the reign of the beast in Jerusalem. He reigns.
70th week of Daniel.
Exactly. He reigns. And so with the 70th week, of course, mentioned in Daniel 9, he confirms a covenant with many for 1 week. Then he breaks that covenant in the middle of the week. And then the angel begins to tell Daniel about once that covenant is broken, basically all hell breaks loose is what he's talking about. Then, of course, we know that's parallel to what Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 24, when he references Daniel 9 and says, look, when you see the abomination of desolation mentioned by Daniel, he says, tell Judea to flee into the mountains. And then he goes and pray that you're on.
Well, yeah, I mean, standing where it ought not, meaning he enters into the third temple, in case people don't realize. So maybe just explain to them, because if there's somebody who's kind of learning right now, they're like,
yeah, go ahead and explain it.
Well, yeah, because there's a third temple that's built, and of course, the Antichrist, he's allowing everybody, go ahead, worship whoever you want, do whatever you want, religious freedom, go for it. But in the middle of that week, that prophetic 70th week after 1,260 days, this is Revelation chapter 13, he has an image that is built to himself, and they set it up in the Holy of Holies, and he declares himself to be God. At that point, the Jews that are in the temple at that time, that's when they know, when you see it, run. That's when in Matthew 24, he's saying, and let he that is in the field, let him not turn back to get anything out of his house. And he that's on the housetop, let him not just go. There's 3 different things, run. And that's when we see that those Jews, those remaining Jews, and that's when at that point, Jerusalem is surrounded by his armies. They're fleeing to Petra, which is in Jordan. But I don't want to go any further in that, but I just want them to know about that moment where the Jews realize, wait a minute, this person is, you know,
Right, because he's given that rule uh for 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years times time and a half. It's all that, like, we got all these different versions of it.
yeah,
But interesting too is when we go back to one chapter into Revelation chapter 12, and there's the vision that John has. He talks about that woman, and the woman in who represents Israel,
yeah.
and she's fleeing into the wilderness where God has prepared a place for her for 1,260 days. So I feel like that will be those who are paying attention to that prophecy in Daniel, even if they never picked up a New Testament book or Bible, you know what I'm saying? But if they know the writings of the prophets, then they'll say, wait, well, that's not a good thing, you know what I'm saying? And flee. But then we know that there are those who are going to stay and pledge their allegiance to the beast.
Well,
Because
but we also know, even at the end, toward the end, at the very end in Zechariah chapter 12 and also 9, there's very, very few left. We see in Zechariah 14. I mean,
yeah,
chapter,
it's just
what
a
verse?
remnant. He actually says a remnant in those chapters.
But yeah, so we see that there's hand-to-hand combat, and their strength will be like that of David. They're given supernatural strength because they're fighting hand to hand. And what's really important to say is, see, there's a misnomer, is that many believers think that the Jews, because they are waiting for their Messiah to come,
They are.
okay, but they get it confused with them thinking, see, we're looking for Christ to come from where? Every eye shall see him, Revelation 1:4, 1:6. Every eye shall see him, right? And so forth. They think, see, we know he's coming in the second coming, where the every eye shall see him, right? We know Zechariah says that in Zechariah chapter
They will see him, and they will
12.
they said they will see him whom they pierce, and they will mourn.
Mourn, right? It says the house of David apart and their wives apart, the house of Nathan apart, their wives apart, and so on. And then a fountain is opened up in Israel for sin and uncleanness, right? For all the people. But what's important to say is, they're not looking for their Messiah to come from heaven. They're looking for a man.
That's correct.
Okay, so there's a big difference, and that's important because, see, they're looking for, and so here comes this man, right? And so we're looking for the man, the Messiah. Their Messiah already came, and he's coming back again. And so, but without getting into any more of that, I just say it's important for people to know that they're looking for a human man.
That's
to
correct.
come. That's
Right. They're not
their
looking for him
lineage.
right. They're not looking for him to come back in the clouds like we
Yeah,
know.
that's right.
It's a human form of someone who's born, or what have you. So taking all of that and tying it into this rabbi saying that after the 10th Jubilee, that the messianic era of the end will begin. So I saw how some people, okay, so let me go back to pick on Western Christians again. Okay, Western, because it's just the truth. We're about truth, right? We have this ideology. It's called the microwave. I call it the microwave popcorn prophecy. So like the microwave was invented. I forget when it was invented, but the microwave was invented in maybe the 70s, the 60s or 70s, so that you can cook your food faster, right? And so then TV dinners were created, and then everybody was flopped in front of a television with TV dinners, and everything went down tubes after that. So the idea is that you put it in the microwave, you pop on for 1 minute, 2 minutes, bing, it's done, right? And so we have this like microwave popcorn mentality when it comes to prophecy. And so when we look for something, we're like, well, it has to happen at this time, in this way, at this place, in these particular people, at this particular second, on this particular date. And then if it doesn't, then we toss it in the trash. I find that to be really interesting, because one of the things the Lord had recently spoken to me, I was actually talking to the Lord when he had me to revisit the testimony and prophecies of Dimitri Duduman, who had been given prophecies about America in 1984, and I was a little girl at that time, and how the churches that he went into are churches of ministers that actually have stood face to face and talked to over the phone over the years. And I know with some of these ministers in the churches that are still standing today, they're teaching, their stance, their focus is completely the opposite of what Dimitri Duduman was warning us about all the way back in the 80s, from the beginning of mid 80s into the late 90s, because he passed away in the late 90s. I think he passed away in 97, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like, I was talking to the Lord a couple weeks ago, and I was just like, Lord, how can we forget, what you sent him here to tell us is, and I was thinking about David Wilkerson. I said, he told us, the vision that he had in 1973, I think it was, we were told, and the Lord had spoke to me, and he said, I caused them to forget. And he gives me this scripture, and I'm not going to go deep into it, but I remembered that. I said, he said he caused them to forget. And just as he allowed Israel's eyes to be blinded and ears to be deafened, and that's the prophecy going back to why they missed Mashiach, right? He allowed them. Isaiah predicted that they would have eyes that didn't see and ears that didn't hear, lest they recognize and be healed, in that sense. And so the Lord was saying, I allowed the American church to be blinded and deafened to this so that the prophecies would come to pass. So I was thinking about that in regards to this prophecy, because what I noticed is that, there was all of this big stuff going on, before Trump became president. There were so many more Christians that were on board about the fact that we were in the end times, and people were looking at the prophecies of Ben Yehuda, or Yehuda ben Samuel. They were looking at the tetrads, the blood moons, the signs in the heavens, like all of these different things, okay? And yet when those years came and passed, or a new president got into office, it's like we forgot. It's like we went to sleep and like, oh, well, that doesn't apply anymore. The man didn't say that Mashiach would come in 2017. He said there would be 10 Jubilees, which he predicted that precisely. It precisely came to pass. And he said after the 10th Jubilee, which marked it, the beginning, after that, which was 2017, that would begin the error, as he said, of the messianic end times. Okay. So that didn't mean that the Messiah or the Antichrist, whichever one you want to play with it, that was going to come in 2017. Yeah, I saw people writing that. I saw people posting that. I saw people say, well, he didn't. And I'm like, oh my God, because we have this microwave popcorn mentality. This is not what that man said. He said that would be a marking. So I want to point out 2017 and why it was so cotton picking significant in that sense. So we go back to 2017. First and foremost, some very powerful things happened in 2017 that's tied into this, that still is linked to the British Army, to all of this stuff. The first thing, do you remember how they had that UN, what did they call it? The United Nations Security Council. You remember when Obama went out with a bang? Remember, Trump wins in November of 2016. And so Obama gets to stay in office until inauguration, which was like January 17th or January 19th of 2017, I think it was. So remember, he goes to that UN council and he, for the first time, abstains from voting, or that veto for Israel, declaring that Israel needed to return to its 1967 borders. Remember that?
I do.
Because that was a big stink. So he goes out with this bang. He makes his stance, his declaration. Well, then a month after that was the Paris Peace Conference, again, 2017. And John, right before the inauguration of President Trump, then President Trump. And John Kerry goes, and there's this whole, and the whole entire Paris Peace Conference Summit is all about what? The peace in the Middle East. And they're enforcing the fact that Israel and the Palestinians need to come to a two-state solution. Now, the Paris Peace Conference was on January 15th of 2017. So very big markings in history, because we're talking about 2017, right? So also, we know that that's the year that Trump becomes president. So what does Trump do? He goes to Jerusalem and he goes to the Western Wall. He is the first president ever in the history of the United States to go to the Western Wall as a president. I had to go do research on that to make sure that was true, because I was like, no, I remember seeing a picture of Obama at the Western Wall. So that can't be a true statement. Listen, and I know we're having this conversation. Like, I know, like, girl, let me tell you.
No, I know. And I wanted to say, go ahead, please. No, please.
I had no idea that when Obama went to the Western Wall, he went in July of 2008 before he even won the presidency. He visited Jerusalem and the Western Wall, and he puts a prayer. You know how they go into Jerusalem and you fold up your little prayers? The Western Wall is only for men. Well, they have a men and a women's side. I take that back. But the women's side is like off to the right in a small corner. Right. But mostly it's the men that are allowed at the Western Wall. And he writes down a prayer and he sticks it in the wall. He's there at the Western Wall in the evening time with a kippah or yarmulke, whichever one you want to call it, on his head. And I'm like, wait, what? He does that before he becomes president. He tells someone that he puts his prayer in the wall, and then he never visited the Western Wall again. So anyways, I had to throw that in there because that blew my mind away. Because I was like, why did he go before he became? Anyways, that's a whole nother story. Okay. So anyway, so Trump becomes the first president to go to the Western Wall. Also 2017. What also happens in 2017? On December 6th of 2017 is the announcement where Trump recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and they begin to make a preparation to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So these are all extremely significant moves, okay, for Israel. They're stair-steppers, but notice it happens when? At the 10th Jubilee. Just as Rabbi Judah predicted, marking the beginning. He said it would be the beginning of the Messianic era. And I know for a fact, and I don't know about, and I think you'll agree with me, that those things that happened in 2017 were very significant in the spirit, and they were very significant in the natural when it came to Israel. Marking, and so we know that Trump goes into office, of course, for 4 years, and then he's gone. But the thing is that he leaves, and then you know, we're not going to get into all the Trump and all of that. But now we're at the point where the Queen passes away at the 70th year marking. Mind you, remember, the Ottoman Empire loses Jerusalem to who? The British Army, the British government, the British kingdom. And that is when the Balfour Declaration
is the written. Part that I wanted you to talk about.
Yes. So the Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War. So this is all during World War I, which the Ottoman Turks was a part of that whole World War I battle, okay? They were announcing officially the support for the establishment of a natural or national home for Jewish people. So a lot of people think it all happened in 1948. No, it began in 1917. And it started with the British Kingdom, okay? And so, and they called it Palestine at the time. The declaration was contained in a letter that was dated November 2nd of 1917 from the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, that's why it's called the Balfour Declaration. But check this out. It was him and Lord Rothschild.
That's right.
Yes, that was there, who was the leader of the British community at that time. And we all know about the Rothschilds. There's a lot of stuff out there about them, and we're not going to go into that right now. For the transmission to a Zionist Federation of Great Britain and Ireland. Okay. And the text of the declaration was published in the press on the 9th of November of 1917. Okay, so also I want to talk about this that I thought was also very interesting, playing with numbers again. The first negotiations between the British government and the Zionists. Now, the Zionists, and a lot of people don't understand what Zionists are. The Zionists is a group of officials, whether it's government, royalty, what have you, that believed in a sovereign nation for Jewish people, a Zionist movement. Okay, so there's a lot of people who are consider themselves Zionists, like Henry Kissinger and George Soros, and you're like, okay, yeah, those are bad people. But these are people that are part of Jewish. They're part, not Jewish. They're Jewish people, but they're part of the Zionist regime, Zionist movement, or what have you. They're not interested so much in the religious aspect, I think is what I would put it as far as like the study of Judaism, like the rabbis, rabbinical scholars, what have you. They are only interested more so in the political side. That's what kind of separates them. The Zionists are more political people. They're politically focused into basically making Israel / Jerusalem, this pretty much the center of the world in a sense, or the Jewish people, the elite in that sense, without saying too much. So it was Britain, the Britain monarchy, that first wrote the Balfour Declaration to officially turn Israel into, or what's called Palestine, into an actual nation, beginning in 1917. So interestingly, the first conference between the British Parliament, the British government, and the Zionist people of that time took place on February 7th of 1917. Exactly, check this out, 700 years after Rabbi Judah ben Samuel's death. 700 years to the day. And we got these even numbers, not 7-1, not 703. Now, you know what I'm saying? But he dies in February of 1217. 700 years later, they have this meeting to begin the works of bringing an official nation for the Jewish people, which we know they began working on it. They started putting public postings, and there's old newspaper articles that you can look up or what have you, where they're talking about this. The Rothschilds funded it. This is where, and I know we're kind of running out of time, this is where a lot of the replacement theology comes in, because some people have dug up this history, and they say, well, then it was the devil that gave it to them, but I go back to Isaiah 45. God owns everything.
That's right.
And the Bible says that the wicked will store up wealth for the righteous, and what Satan meant for evil, God will turn around for the good. So he still owns everything, whether it's the Satanist or the saint, it doesn't matter in that sense. Yeah. Okay. So all of that being said, in the Balfour Declaration, and talking about the establishment of Palestine, of making a central or nationally recognized home for the Jewish people that were scattered all over the world, and they knew they were scattered. That also too, and part of that declaration was that they would have, that the British monarch would be able to name a king of Jerusalem. But the stipulation was that it had to be a male. It had to be a male monarch, a British monarch. He had to be male. So no female, no queen, no princess, okay, could be in charge of this in that sense. All right. And so all of that saying, fast forward, there had been a big thing, and right when the queen died, I saw the headline in the Jerusalem Post that said, why did the queen never visit Israel? And they were like, well, you know, it made her look like she was anti-Semitic. The truth was the Queen Elizabeth was not anti-Semitic. She actually had a very good rapport with the British Jews. And it makes sense because they're the ones who wrote the Balfour Declaration. So it would make sense that the British monarchy would be linked to Zionists and Jewish people. Does it make, you know what I'm saying? It makes sense. They were part of the whole establishment in that sense, and the funding of what later became Israel in this sense. Okay. But the reason why, and if you look at it, she sent like the Dutch, she sent the Prince, she sent Prince Charles, she sent Prince William went, but she never went. And it has to do with the fact that in the agreement that a female was not allowed to go into Jerusalem. It had to be a male monarch. But the interesting thing too is that now that she's gone, and again she reigned for 70 years, and now we have a king again, and then however long he lasts, there's another king, because it would be Prince William. There's no princesses that are in the
he's a king of fierce countenance.
Mm-hmm.
The Antichrist.
Who is the king?
The king of fierce countenance is the name, another name for the Antichrist.
Okay. No, I was talking about King Charles.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. That's okay. No, I'm saying
he doesn't have a fierce countenance.
No, he doesn't.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Continue.
No, that's fine. I was like, well, yeah, no, the current king, Charles, who was Prince Charles, and now he has, you know, Prince William would be his successor. I'm saying there's no princesses, there's no queens in that recent lineup, okay? Him or Prince William, whichever one, will have the authority to name a ruler over specifically Jerusalem. I want to throw in one more thing. I know we're running out of time. Here's something, Joni, that fried my brain. So there was a Princess Alice of Battenberg. She lived from 1885 to 1969. This is the mother-in-law of Queen Elizabeth. You're happy. I was like, that
Philip's mother.
Gosh. Yes. So yes, Philip's mother, who was Queen Elizabeth's husband. So, you know, like nobody liked to talk about her. So interestingly, this woman, and you can, in her other title, if you all want to go do some research on her, was called Princess Andrew. Okay, now that's her other title. Princess Andrew is the same person as Princess Alice of Battenberg. So long story short, you know, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now I had to do some research and find out why she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and put away for 2 years in Switzerland, where she was treated by a doctor who dealt with Sigmund and Freud. And is Sigmund Freud? Is that how I pronounce it? And you know, their ideology is satanic. I'm gonna just put it that way. Oh, humanistic. It's satanic. Oh, humanism. Yes. She was treated by them. But check this out. I was like, okay, so she was diagnosed. I'm gonna go some notes. In 1930, Princess Andrew was diagnosed with schizophrenia and committed to a sanatorium in Switzerland. Okay, and she lived away from her husband after that. So I had to look. I said, well, what happened? Like, what? So here's the interesting thing. Now I'm gonna leave this to everybody who's watching is imagination, but the reason why they diagnosed her with schizophrenia is because now these are their words, she became deeply religious. She converted to Greek Orthodox. She became a Greek Orthodox, became deeply religious, and started having visions and prophecies.
Wow.
Yes. She started having visions that were about, they called them apocalyptic visions and prophecies. And they had this woman committed, girl. They had her committed and diagnosed. They said she was having vivid hallucinations, which were really her visions. And they diagnosed her with schizophrenia and sent her to a sanatorium in Switzerland where they did shock therapy on her.
That's right.
But here's the interesting thing. She leaves the sanatorium, and where does she go? She goes and lives in Greece.
Right.
And she devotes her time to doing what? Housing Jewish refugees during World War II, which because of that, Israel recognizes her. I'm trying to think of the name. They call it the Righteous Among Nations Honorarium, which is in Israel. They actually recognize Princess Alice as because of what she did for Jewish refugees during World War II. So she is finally invited. She's pretty much ousted by the royal family. They invite her finally to come back and live in the Windsor Castle, where she dies 2 years later. You know where they end up burying this woman? Per her request, girl, she's buried in Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives.
Oh, wow. Okay. Since we're on that line, let me keep going. Tarshish, and we're not going to go much longer, but hey,
Yeah.
you know what? I think it's important. Tarshish is the ancient name for the British Isles. And Noah had a son. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. One of Japheth's sons was Javan. Javan had 4 children, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. Very interesting. Another thing, so that dates you, so there was one man, Tarshish. Also, too, it's interesting to note that King Solomon had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea. And once every 3 years, the fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. 1 Kings 22:48 states that Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir to get gold. Also, too, a lot of the things that were built in Solomon's temple came from Tarshish, the silver, the gold. Another interesting thing is the word Britain is I don't want to get too much into it because, like I said, we're going too far, but I just think it's super important to say this. The ancient, they were a prominent merchant power in the world, according to Ezekiel 27:12. Now, in Reese's encyclopedia, one of the metals that they used was named cassiteros, but the Greeks, and to which Aristotle has applied the epithet calicon, I know it's kind of crazy, just bear with me, indicates plainly the country from which it was procured. In the Syriac language, Veritanic or Baratanic signifies the land of tin, from which the name Britain is supposed to be derived. So, with that being said, Tarshish, Jonah fled to Tarshish. In the millennial kingdom, in Psalm 72, I just want to say this real quick. It talks about them. They're mentioned in that millennial chapter where it says, the kings of Tarshish, the kings of Tarshish.
What verse is that in Psalm 72? Verse what? Just so the
10.
people will know. Verse 10?
10.
Okay.
The whole thing is the millennial kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
This is still future.
Mm-hmm.
The kings of Tarshish and of the isles, because they're an isle, shall bring presents. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. Now, Sheba and Seba have, I think they're connected with Sheba and Dedan of Ezekiel chapter 38:13. Those are the only two who don't throw in with the Russian coalition of the Gog Magog nations. Tarshish actually is mentioned, and I just learned this. So I'm little, I'm not perfect here. I'm just saying, okay. Tarshish plays a significant role in the end, even in the Battle of Armageddon. how it's like this. There's one thing that can happen in the end. The only thing we don't know is when and how. When Armageddon takes place, Britain will not be with Europe. Okay.
Well, you know, they broke away in that Brexit. Remember, they
That's all
broke
part of
away
it.
from, yep, that's part of it too.
That's all part of it. But they actually are mentioned as the kings bringing presents
Right.
to the
To Christ at that point, because it's the millennial reign.
So it's very important. So what we're looking at is a major player in the
end
very
times.
end times. I'm not going to go anymore. I just wanted to pitch that.
Last thing, Henry Groover, I think's vision of Prince Charles. When you all get a chance to look that up, I think I might pronounce his name wrong, but Groover, I mean, it's not Groover. It's, you know what I'm talking about?
The president?
No.
Oh, Henry Groover. No, oh, you know what? No. Go ahead, and I'll tell you why I said that. But go ahead.
Okay, no, Henry but he Groover. Has a prophet. Yes, he has a prophecy. You can go look it up. I can't remember. It was a very long time ago. Maybe 30, 40 years ago. He has this prophetic dream vision of Prince Charles, and it's talking about an invasion where Russia comes in. And he talks about Gog and Magog, but interestingly, Prince Charles comes to him and says to the United States, you're going to have to fight this war, but you're going to fight it without God. Those are the words that was given. And it was Russia coming in with some other country, and they were invaded in the United States. But Prince Charles in the dream warns them that Russia's coming to invade America, and that America will have to fight that war without God. Which again goes back to Dimitri Duduman's prophecy about Russia, and David Wilkerson and William Britt. There's so many people who saw an invasion of America. I've seen it, and there are others who have seen it that say the bear and even the dragon, which represents China, will come in and invade us. But when people get a chance, look him up in his prophecy regarding Prince Charles. But he talks about how he tells them you will have to fight this war without God.
Ooh. You know, the reason why I did the Grover Cleveland thing is because I did some research, and I had learned this a long time ago, but I just remembered yesterday, and I'm so glad I remembered now. And I did research on this years ago, like really excellent research. So it's not like, oh, I read an article. No, I went into the blood lineage of the presidents. 43 of our U.S. presidents had a direct blood lineage to the royal throne.
The royal throne, yes.
So did Obama. Clinton had the most, but I'm just saying, so you have to see kings. When they talk about kings, when Jesus says he is the King of Kings, he is the Lord of Lords, and we're looking as far back as a man named Tarshish that came from Noah. See what I'm saying? God had a plan. God had an ancient redemption plan, and it started with a man. Now I'm going to do more research into this man Tarshish, see what I come up with, so I'm not going to go any further.
And when you look at that, I want you to go into the Testament of the Patriarchs. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's like Dead Sea Scrolls or what have you, because in there you will find like I'm going to call it a testament, but I'm not sure if that's the proper term for it. And it's not an apocrypha. It's a testament of Noah, where he has a prophetic dream regarding his 3 sons. It's really, really interesting. Yes. And this is part of the Testament of Patriarchs is part of the Dead Sea Scroll collections. And where he has the angel of the Lord, this is post-flood, basically lets him know about where his sons are going to go. And it's the prediction that I've known for years, that the descendants of Japheth would be conquerors, and that we know the European armies or what have you, they conquered the world. They did.
Those are the Japhetic nations.
They are the Japhetic nations, and yes, but it was given to him, and that, about basically that the Messiah would come from Shem. But also it talks about Ham, because we know Nimrod, who was the father of all pagan religions, came as a descendant of Ham. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Cush as well. But also too, interestingly, I'll say this and we'll end it, we'll just wet their whiskers, is that the Antichrist would come from the descendants of Ham.
Very interesting.
So look that up.
Very interesting. And just so I could say this too, in the last thing, I read a very interesting article from a man who has, like, I think he was a PhD in ancestral, in antiquity, ancestral antiquity tracing. And he said that the Obama traced his bloodline to King Turhaka of Ethiopia.
But do you also know that his mother's bloodline is also from the tribe of Dan? The tribe of Dan specifically, which was eliminated out of the 444,000 in Revelation chapter 7.
Because Manasseh takes his place.
That's correct. Go on.
Well, I was going to say, because in Numbers chapter 2 is the setup, right? The temples, the tent of meeting is in the middle. And then it said, okay, Judah goes first. There's Judah, Levi. Okay, there's three tribes. They're the closest to the tent. And then it's like tree rings, they go out. So Dan is mentioned last in Numbers chapter 2, and Judah's mentioned first. The tents of Judah shall go first. However, in Ezekiel chapter 47, in the millennial reign setup, it says, and the tribe of Dan is mentioned first.
That's correct. And then in addition to that, I'm sorry, go on. In the prophecy of Dan in Genesis, Jacob says that Dan is like the serpent that lies at the side of the road and bites the heel of the horse so that the rider falls backwards. And the Mazareth, and maybe I shouldn't say that, the Masoretic text? The Mazaroth, that's mentioned in Job.
Oh, are you talking about the
constellations? The constellation. Dan is under the symbol of the scorpion, the scorpion as well. So it's a lot.
And remember, Jesus even says, "You brood of vipers." Remember, he called them, like, I mean, I know you and we can go on and on and on, but you wet everybody's whiskers. That is for sure. So anyways, I just hope you guys, we know it's long. It's an hour and 30 minutes. But sometimes when the Holy Spirit is flowing, good teaching is flowing, shut it off and come back to it. I mean, if you're going to watch this and pass it on, because this is stuff, you could wet, like Mena just said, it'll wet your whiskers. And really what she means by that, go do your own research.
Exactly.
Go. Be good Bereans. Study the scriptures. Dig in. Don't stick in one stream. The Holy Spirit is the teacher. He means for you to learn these things. He wants you to know the time that you're living in. He wants you to have understanding of the times, like tribe of Issachar. They had understanding of the times that Israel may know what they are to do, and they were all attentive to them. So be intelligent, know where you're at in prophecy, and be careful that you're not going with every wind of this and that and everything else. Be strong, be rooted and grounded in the word. Let the Holy Spirit, the teacher, be the beginning and the ending of your education. Like Mena was saying in the beginning, everybody's like, oh, I saw this and this happened, and I know it, number here, number there. Listen, God he is a mathematic. He's fathomless, but he pretty much let us know everything that's going on. And students, it's like, it is a treasure hunt, because you're going to read stuff in the Bible where you're reading along and all of a sudden something doesn't make sense. That's because it's a treasure hunt. And the true student, if you have a heart for study, the Holy Spirit means for you to understand where you're living in, because we believe with all of our hearts, and not just because we definitely want it to happen. We know where we're at. We know that the church age is it's ending. It is at the end. So be strong in the Lord, be upright, get away from crazy. Because even this it's always one last thing. I saw all these people going, oh, the Lord prophesied to me and told me 3 days ago that the queen would die. It's like all these people 10 days before, the night before, the Holy Spirit revealed to me the queen would die. I'm like, look, everybody in the world knew the queen was going to die. So don't listen to all of that. Be very careful, because there's a million false prophecies out there. Be rooted and grounded in his word. That's
Amen.
all I got. That's all I got for you guys. Until next time. But Mena, thank you so much for being on. I want to have you back on again soon. And I'm going to leave your Faithful Walk Healing Ministries website link below.
.com. That's it.
.com. And also, too, you put out a recent podcast, because you're no longer doing Watchmen on the Wall, on telephone, like
Conferences,
conference.
right.
But I love it in a way so much better. It's more, you can concentrate better, because I listened to that message. So make sure you guys, what's the name of that message again?
It is our Watchmen on the Wall episode 1 and episode 2, but episode 2 is called The Changing of the Guard. You can find us on Anchor. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. You would just have to do a search under Faithful Walk Healing Ministries. But episode 2 is The Changing of the Guard, where I talk about some of the things that we mentioned here today.
You know what I'll do? I'll just go ahead, for their convenience. I'm just going to add both of those links, all 3 links, faithfulwalkhealingministries.com, and then the 2 links to the podcast. That way they don't have to go searching. And if they want anything more, they can go do that. But that'll be good for them. Okay, you guys, God bless you. Thank you again, Mena. Shalom. Go with the Lord.
Shalom.